Hi, my name's Phil.
And my name is Rob.
And we've been mates for years. We've done loads of stuff together.
All of which, mainly, have turned into chaos.
But someone then suggested, why don't you do a podcast? That seemed like a good idea, didn't it?
Really did.
Then we realised neither of us have ever done one of those. So is this going to work?
Well, we'll find out, won't we?
Welcome to Two Pastors in a Pod.
So, Phil, here we are. Do you know where we are today? Rob, do you know where we are?
I know exactly where
We're
we
in Chelsea.
are. I know exactly where we
Chelsea.
are. Why are we shouting?
Because we're with the pensioners.
So, welcome to another Two Pastors in a Pod. If you've not joined us on a podcast before, we're two ordinary city boys who have the privilege of being ministers in churches in the rules. And the subject matter for today is not an easy one.
I've forgotten.
That I can believe.
You know when your grey matter goes?
Or your grey hair appears.
You know where it goes and you forget things.
Yes.
What are their names?
I have no idea. We'll find out who our two guests are in a minute. Rob, did you forget anything today?
Do you know what?
What?
You forgot something before I forgot something. What did you forget?
I forgot the teapot.
And guess what I forgot?
The tea.
Yes. But Nathan, our producer, has come to the rescue.
So
we
we can't
can't have our pensioners
Absolutely.
not having a nice cup of tea.
Not at this time of day.
No.
So it's great to have guests with us. We love having guests on Two Pastors in a Pod, and today we are joined by Phil and Ruth.
I'm Phil.
You're Phil.
I'm Ruth.
So where are you from?
We're from currently in Northamptonshire, a village called Brixworth, but originally from South East London.
So that's where the accent. Whereabouts in South East London?
London again.
In Plumstead.
In Plumstead, you got it.
Was that a problem for you out there? Was it?
I don't like to say it, Ruth, but these questions are going to get slightly more tricky.
Before we came on air, Ruth was saying, "You'll have to stop me speaking so much. I speak so much." And she can't even get one word out of her mouth. That's stage fright, that is. Either that or her teeth have fallen out.
Well, she normally leaves those on the side anyway.
Can I just say the first lesson in getting old is to be kind to pensioners?
Really?
That's what it is. It's
Do
been
you know what?
We're not seeing much of that.
I haven't read that one. No.
So the thing is, the subject matter isn't really just old age. It's really about retirement, which for some people, particularly for Christians, and to be honest, for me and him over there, it is a slightly scary thought that for us, retirement is kind of approaching.
Yeah.
For you guys who are, our viewers and listeners might not realise that you are slightly older than Rob. And miles older than me. But we're not you don't talk about retirement though, do you? You talk about something slightly different.
Yeah. You talk about it.
What's the R word?
So you can say retirement or you can say repurpose your life.
So we're looking at how life is repurposed.
Because I think in all of us, God has a purpose for us, whatever our age is.
Yeah. So
you can tell us what age we should retire.
Yeah, it's interesting because we'll look at some scriptures on that as well, which is quite fascinating to see what the Bible says about retirement. But the question is, in retirement, how much tea do you drink?
Yes.
Or how much coffee?
Well, this is a tea gig, all right?
It is. Right, okay.
Which we've had this conversation.
We had this conversation.
I want to introduce coffee, but no, soft lad over there. He wants his tea because he thinks tea is the hook. So we both forgot our tea bits today.
So this is best in brew. Yes. So what we got, fortunately, Nathan's come to the rescue with a very appropriate brew. So the idea is you can taste this tea.
Yeah.
Then we'll talk about what you think's in it.
Okay.
Or what it might be called. And this is a tea with milk. So we brewed it a little bit earlier. You have to give it a rating out of 10.
Prepared earlier. Don't spill it all over the table.
Well, I have never.
But then again,
it's not my teapot.
That's what happens to older people, isn't it?
Yeah, it gets shaky.
No dribbles.
You speak for yourself over there. I tell you what, you weren't kidding about the dribbling bit, were you?
Yeah, you're dribbling a bit there, Phil.
Oh, dear me, I've got more tea on the table than I've got in the cups. Right, here we go. The dribble is over.
It's Ruth. She makes you nervous. Have you noticed
how nervous she makes
me? I'd like to tell the viewers she's had her hair done especially for this today.
You wouldn't believe it, would you? So the good thing is, apparently she gets special rates. That's what I've heard.
I think it's worth saying at this point that
We are friends.
we have been friends for many years.
I have made such a mess of
I
this
was
table.
best man at his wedding, believe it or
Yeah,
not.
well, believe me or not, I couldn't find anybody else. Right,
True.
right now, so you've got to smell it, taste it, tell us what you think it is.
Oh,
Ooh,
that's
it's
fruity.
nice.
It's
No,
not fruity,
it's not
it can't be
fruity.
fruity.
Ooh.
Oh, it's quite bitter.
Depends how-
Is this yours, Nathan?
Have you had it a while in the cupboard? Yes.
Oh, I like
Oh, it's well aged. Okay, so what do you reckon it is? It is really appropriate for the subject matter we've got. What do you think's either in it or what it might be called?
old.
I'll give you a clue. It's Tetley. It's Tetley tea.
Tetley. Do you remember the old Tetley advert?
I do.
Tetley. Oh, I can't even
No,
say
don't
it.
even do it. Let's just concentrate on the tea. What do you reckon? What do you reckon's in it? I've got the box.
Milk.
Well, obviously, there's milk.
Is it aniseed?
No, it isn't, actually. Close. Can you taste any spices in it?
Yes.
What spice? In fact, I can't taste that in it, but
Baby spice.
no. It's got vanilla in it.
Ginger spice.
No, it's got vanilla in it. It's got nutmeg in it.
Oh.
Oh yeah, of course it has.
It's also a decaf. We've not had a
Oh, is it?
decaf tea.
Oh, well, you need to give the decaf to the older generation.
Why?
don't you? Because it keeps them up all night if they don't have it.
And it's called
Oh, bedtime!
it's called
Bedtime.
bedtime tea. Bedtime tea by Tetley. Others are available, but at the end of the day,
But hopefully,
that's what you need.
hopefully they're not listening to this
No,
podcast in bed and it'll put them to sleep.
well, it may do. You
Normally
don't
on a Sunday that happens with you, doesn't it?
So let's find out a little bit about you guys.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about first, Phil. Let's start with you. Your kind of background, what you did for a job,
Yeah.
and how long you've actually been retired from secular work.
So I worked for how many years in total? About 20 something years in total for a Danish food company who really just produced lots of pigs in Denmark.
Bacon. Danish bacon.
Yeah, that's good.
And then
We apologise to the vegetarians listening.
Made bacon and cooked meats and
Right.
fresh pork and everything else.
And what sort of role were you in that?
So started off when we were down in London as a salesman
Mhm.
and covered southeast London, Anglia, and so on. And then we moved up in 1985 to a new place that was being built in Wellingborough in Northamptonshire. And we had a year to decide whether we went with it, and we just felt the Lord saying yes. And so we moved to a house on a new estate in 1985.
Okay.
And I became sales director at that point, and then 2 years later, managing director of the company.
Right, so you moved up the chain to senior management, and
Yeah, and then the company was taken over in 93, I think it was 92, 93. I had one or two other jobs, then started to work for myself.
okay,
And that was an interesting experience. I worked, one of my clients was an Irishman who had made fortune, millions of pounds in growing mushrooms and selling them to all the retailers, so he was quite a big supplier, and he just bought a pork-based company where little piggies went in one end and came out the other in various ways
okay.
in Northern Ireland, and he hadn't got a clue what he was talking about. So he asked me would I work for 1 day a week for him, and ended up 4 days a week. And then after a couple of years, we were considering, we'd had 2 calls from 2 churches, one in Suffolk and one
So that's to become a pastor of a church.
to be a pastor of the church, yeah. And virtually the day we decided that we were going to go for that in Brixworth, which is the village we lived in, he phoned me and said, "I've got some bad news for you." He said, "I've got to sell the business." He said, "Mushrooms are great. They don't make a noise.
Yeah,
Pigs do, and you've got all this blood everywhere and everything else." And so that kind of just confirmed.
So that was your confirmation out of secular work and into pastoral.
So how many years did you say you were in secular work?
So until 1992, I think it was.
And then you became a pastor?
Became a pastor in 96.
And you retired or repurposed
Yeah.
from that when?
So just before COVID,
Yeah.
we planned to retire, but the church we were going to then, a large church, their pastor left, and they said to me, would I do a 2-year pastor interim there, which I did. Then COVID hit 6 months later, so that was an interesting experience.
Yeah, for all of us.
And then finally retired after the 2 year, by which time a guy had come in, who's we're really pleased with the way the Lord led us. So
So you've been through the gambit, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've been through the gambit.
Yeah.
But the viewers at home will want to know, or the listeners at home will want to know how old you are.
I'm sure they would.
Yes. No, how old were you when you retired?
So
From everything.
Yes, we were. I was 71. Was I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm 73 now.
Right, so you're 73 now, which, to be honest, you're actually looking quite good at 73.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I do.
I know. Well, Ruth does.
Well, that's because she hasn't got a single grey hair. I mean, on her head.
Yeah.
Ruth, what did you do?
Come on then, Ruth.
What
Tell
did you do
us
when you
tell
worked
us your
years?
life story, Ruth.
So when we moved up to Northampton, I trained to be a counsellor, a Christian counselling service, and was there for 25 years.
Wow.
I finished in 2016 only because I didn't want to re-accredit, and it just a lot of work. And so I felt at that time I was going to look forward to working more in the church with Phil, but God had different ideas.
Different plans. So I think one of the things for most of us in the world we live in, when we retire, that's our chance to do holidays and spend time with the kids and to relax and do a gardening and to drink more tea, read books.
Decaf tea.
Decaf tea. So that obviously wasn't quite the way it worked for you, was it? I mean, there's lots of people who've got older folk in church. But we live in a society that kind of says once you hit 60, 65, your usefulness, even in churches, is kind of waning a bit and not thing. I mean, we were talking about retirement and pensions, weren't we? And you discovered when pensions started.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's only in the last 120 years that this concept of retirement has become part of our culture. Do you know where the concept of retirement began? Anyone know? Well, you do know because I told you that earlier in the car. But it was actually von Bismarck, believe it or not.
Yeah.
In 1879, I think, he was the Chancellor of Germany, and he decided that he didn't like certain individuals who were part of their equivalent of Parliament, and they were older men. So he introduced a legislation to say that at the age of 70, there was compulsory retirement. So we introduced that in Germany. It didn't exist here in the UK. Retirement and pensions began in the UK in 1909, January 1909.
What was the pensioner age? What was retirement age?
70.
So we're not far off that now.
But the reason the government set it at that, I guess, was because there weren't that many 70-year-olds. And incidentally, it was means tested as well.
Yeah.
Back in 1909.
Don't say that too loud.
But yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But, well, you see, that's the kind of history. But retirement goes back further than that, as we discovered just the other day when we read from the Bible,
Yes.
Numbers 8:24, where it says the Levites need to retire. They need to stop working in the temple at 55.
Yeah.
But then it goes on to say, but you are to assist or help those in the temple, which is kind of what you've gone into, isn't it? You've retired from secular work. Yeah. I mean, in terms of people who are watching who maybe are approaching retirement age in secular life, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Is there a fear in that, do you think? Do you think there's something to be afraid of? Because certainly for men, many men die within a few years of retirement simply because they don't want to.
See, I've counselled men who've hit their 60s and decided that they want to stop secular work and do various other things. But the problem is they haven't gone to do the various other things. They've just stepped back and done nothing. And because of that, they've lost all sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And often you find certainly some of the blokes that I've met, they just go under for a while until they get their heads around, well, what is life now going to be? Because you go to work for 45 years and you're surrounded by people in the workplace, and all of a sudden you step out of that and it's complete change.
Yeah, I mean, did you ever have a fear about retiring?
No, we were looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I think
Go
a little while ago we were reading something where it said 0 to 30 you're learning most of the time, and 30 to 60 you're applying what you've learned, and then 60 plus you're
passing that on.
You're passing on what your
I
experience.
think that's really good.
And I think if you really grasp what your purpose is in life, because God's clearly got a purpose for you, then how do you pass that on to others?
So that's the repurposing, isn't it?
Yeah,
you go from one
definitely.
phase of life through to a next phase, to the next phase, and the final phase, which is the phase that we're all in, it is about encouraging other people, isn't it? Particularly in the ministry and in church life, and to pass on the experience that we have. Do you see it that way?
I think for me the key here is, particularly for those that have had any kind of leadership in church, to recognise that calling for leadership has an end. At some point, and I think the end of that is not the finish of your of what God wants for you, but it's the start of something a bit different. And that's difficult, particularly I think for someone who's been a pastor or an elder, to give that up and really to concentrate on mentoring and helping and assisting. And
let me ask you then, Bob, are you afraid of retiring?
You see, people who know me will know that
You're semi-retired already.
I'll let you do all the work. The people who know me know that I always say from the pulpit, there's no such thing as retirement.
No.
There isn't. It's not a biblical concept. It really isn't a biblical concept.
But what about you?
So am I afraid of retirement?
Yes.
Well, no, because I think that it's exactly what these guys are saying. It's you repurpose, you do something different. What you do is you change what you're doing into something else, but you're always serving God in that. It's like I always say in church again. I said that, it's serving in church is not just for the younger people. If you've got experience, so for instance, if you've been doing junior church or Sunday school ever since you were in your 20s, or why shouldn't you still be doing that in your 80s? If you've got your mental faculties, why shouldn't you still be doing
so
that?
Proverbs 20:29 talks about the young man's glory is their strength. The old man's grey hair is their honour or their glory, in other words, with the wisdom that men. I once preached in a church in the East End of London. Those of you who know when I preach, sometimes my brain and my mouth don't engage quite the same way.
What do you mean sometimes?
Well, all right, most of the time. But I stood there and said, trying to make the point that you don't retire from the things you've done. I said, there's going to be no Chelsea pensioners in heaven. No. There really isn't. No. What I didn't realise was there were 3 Chelsea pensioners sitting at the back in their regalia, and I had to correct myself at the end of the service. But I'm not looking forward to retiring.
Well, can I challenge on what you just said?
Yeah.
Nothing against an 80-year-old doing Sunday school.
Yeah.
But once that 80-year-old goes to be with the Lord, if there's no one trained underneath him, there's no one.
Yeah, but that's a different subject, isn't it?
Well, I think in some ways that individual should be looking at that with the leadership of the church and saying, right, I can help out.
I don't disagree.
Let's
but come on, you've been a minister of a church as well. You've been the pastor of a minister. What do we do with older people who we love dearly, who've done a ministry for donkey's years, who frankly now don't have the capacity to do it, but refuse to let go of it? How do we handle that?
So that's the opposite, isn't it?
Well, it is.
When there comes a point when you should know when it's right.
Yeah, but if they don't know.
Maybe it's a handover.
Come on, you're a counsellor. You've been a counsellor. How do you
She's
handle that?
retired.
Well, she has retired.
No, she's repurposed.
Repurposed, sorry.
Repurposed. Yes.
I think personally that to have one-to-one and try to discover their need, what's driving them, what is
So you're not
important to
suggesting
them.
you go and say, look, to be honest, brother, sister,
No,
you're past this now. Move on.
no, but
Oh.
there's something that's
Oh.
driving them to want to still do that.
Yeah.
And so
No, that's a good point.
to look at that before.
Yeah, that makes
you look at
perfect
that.
sense.
It's always trying to understand, isn't it, what God is still saying to them
Yeah.
in whatever age they're in.
Yeah.
What is God saying to you? And we as leaders within the church, or as ex-leaders within the church,
Yeah.
it's beholden on us to get alongside people and to coax that out of them,
Yeah.
and to help them to repurpose, because we know there are people in church life that do need repurposing,
Absolutely.
and it's how you do that gently and in
Yeah.
love and kindly, because we need to be kind.
And-
We need to be kind
And humble.
and humble.
Without
Humble.
patronising.
Without
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, without patronising. So I mean, but the other thing is, of course, as we get older, and it's true of all of us, as we get older and maybe move out of ministry and church life changes, how do we stop ourselves from becoming bitter or critical of what's going on? My understanding is, as we get older, we should be more like Jesus because we've walked with him longer.
Yeah.
Therefore, our role is to encourage, to build up, to help, not to sit there and go, "Oh, we didn't do it like that. I wouldn't want it done like that."
Back in the day.
Back in the day. I mean, the scriptures say, don't look at the old days and say, why were they better than the ones we've got now? Stop doing that. But how do we, in practical terms, as we get older, how do we practically not become the miseries within church?
Well, that's what
You can start.
For me personally, I think it's a challenge for any age group not to be bitter. So sometimes it's okay to be angry.
Yeah.
It's not okay to stay there. So you've got to work it through. But I think for me personally, I've always got to look at the fruit within and deal with the fruit within. So if I have got bitterness, it's working on that. I think I said to you coming across, I think I'm very aware that older people often lose their filters.
Yeah, they do. They say exactly what they're thinking.
Exactly. So I think it's probably there when you're younger, but you hold it back a bit. But I think when you're older, you can easily just speak it out in a very direct, unkind.
But do you think older people know that? Do you
No,
think? Do you think you know you're doing that?
There needs to be a challenge, doesn't there?
Yeah.
I think people need to be aware that that's how they are, and I don't think Christians are good at accepting criticism, and that goes for all of us, I guess, to some extent. But I do think for me, what we need to do is to accept criticism, but also be, as you're aware of it, then what comes to mind is that scripture in Philippians 4, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is so on and so forth.
Think of all these things.
And once you train your mind to think of those things, you then begin to accept maybe some of the things. None of us many people don't like change. And certainly if it affects them, that becomes difficult. And you do find yourself, the older you get, looking back on, we've had a discussion the last couple of days, just talking about what it was like 30 years ago.
Yeah, how much better the TV adverts were.
Yeah.
All those, and the TV was way better. You can't remember that far back. I mean, there's going to be people watching who are coming up to retirement, and they might be watching this podcast thinking, "Flipping heck, it's not much fun, is it?" What's the joy of retiring as a Christian?
Oh, I can share. Oh, sorry.
Go on.
If I can just tell you the last 2 weeks. All
Yeah.
right? So if we were working, then we, believe it or not, have had a joy coming up here for the last few days, staying
Excellent.
with you.
We've been insulted.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, well, that's part of the course.
But if we were working, we wouldn't be able to have that time.
Sure.
So you sense that God is blessing you. You've got to be careful it's not an ulterior motive. But the week before, Phil was speaking in Suffolk. And so normally you have to get up at 6 o'clock, and I don't like that, and leave about 7 o'clock to get there. And then we had an email from this farmer's wife to say, you can come and stay at our cottage for a few days. Now, if we were working, we wouldn't do that. And you just look back and you think, God just wants to bless. He wants to bless us. And when this first email came from this farmer's wife, I was really tearful at just how God wants to bless. So
so the flexibility you've got within your days make that a lot easier.
And if you're blessed with grandchildren, you've got opportunity to see them.
Get them up from school.
Once a week, twice a week.
So again, family time that particularly maybe you've missed if you've had a job where you work long hours or you've done a pastorate, you haven't had time to invest in that. Well,
there are lots of joy as you get older, and you can use that experience with your grandkids and with people in church life. But just put a different spin for those who are listening to this or watching this, and maybe in their 20s and 30s and 40s. How best do you think folk within congregations can encourage the older folk in the church? And how best can we make these connections between the generations? So how best can they approach us and we approach them? Philip, over to you.
I think
you didn't know that question was coming
up. No, I didn't. I think one of the difficulties is that there's no doubt that the older you get, the more grumpy you can get.
Yes.
And a lot of older people will not be able to be speaking at the same level to people 20, 30 years younger. And that's a sadness, I think. So there needs to be some kind of, I don't know, teaching or something like that.
I think one of the things for me, when I was younger, one of the things I wish I'd done a bit of, and my dad particularly was good at this, but I wish I'd asked older people more questions and sat down with them more and visited with a cup of tea and sat down and said, just tell me about your experience as a Christian. Tell me about the war years. Tell me about how that worked. Because then, I think that older person would have felt useful. And I certainly valued knowing the knowledge going forward. If you've got people who are watching this who are in their 20s, they need to know, how can I best prepare for my retirement, my older years? And I think by sitting down and talking to older folk, then that's a great thing. But how many of our 20s do visit you?
It has to be two-way.
Absolutely. You can't just sit there as an old person and go, well, they don't come and see me.
And if you think about it, someone who's been a Christian 30, 40, 50 years should know better. To be fair, I think we're all, older people, and I'm one of them, have to accept that we need to approach younger people.
And hospitality is another thing, isn't it? I hope, if the Lord spares us into our 70s and 80s, that we'll be able to say to young couples, come and have dinner with us.
What do you think?
So I think that older people think they won't want to talk to me, I'm boring. And younger people think,
they don't.
In Phil's case, they'd probably be right. But moving on.
Carry on.
Well, carry on. Yeah, they don't want to talk to me because I'm boring.
I'm boring, and younger people just don't know how to relate to older people. I do think it's a responsibility of the older people to get alongside. But when I've spoken to people, that's what they.
Can we do anything as churches to change that?
Yeah.
What?
Well, I think we could encourage hospitality.
I think that's a big thing.
I mean, those who run youth work within church as well, it's good to encourage the youth to get alongside the older folk and maybe serve the older folk and build those connections as well.
Yeah, but is that the right thing? Where it always seems, I mean, when we grew up, we grew up in the same church. That when you did a church tea, it was young people go and serve an older person. Well, is that kind of the deal? Isn't it better to go and sit with an older person? Go and engage with them rather than that kind of service in both directions. There must be something better we can do to engage the generation.
Well, Jesus was very relational, wasn't he? And so how can we promote relationships with each other? We're a family, brothers and sisters together. So
all age families.
How we do that. And I think, like in any family, there's the quiet ones.
And the not so quiet ones.
And it's how to get alongside.
And what about home groups? Think about our home groups. How often do we go, well, that's a 20s, 30s house group, and that's an older house group, and that's surely one of the best relational things, certainly I think, is our life groups where you bring every generation together that you can, and you mix those generations. So retirement's a good thing, yes?
Definitely.
You recommend it?
So we're coming to the end of this podcast.
We are.
Believe it or not, we're nearly there. So how would you encourage folk out of a certain generation out there in church life who maybe are feeling that they're lost a little bit in church life? How would you encourage them? What's the takeaway message you'd like to give them?
I think the word repurpose is really helpful.
I think
and I think God has a purpose for everyone.
Yeah.
And therefore seeking God as to what is that for me? Talking to others about that. You know, I mean, one of the things that's quite interesting, I think, is when you say to somebody in leadership, what do you see in me as a church member? What do you see in me
that's good
that is gifted? What's my gift? Because I don't necessarily see it.
Yeah.
And they may very well say to you, well, actually, do you know you're brilliant with children?
Yeah.
You may feel a bit old, but, you know, with young children, Ruth's mum, put her with a child of 2 or 3. I mean,
Mary was brilliant.
She was just brilliant, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure anyone ever definitely told her that, but that was her gift.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, people have gifts, and we need to encourage it. Yeah.
Well, we felt very privileged to have you here, and hopefully we've been a little friendlier to you towards the end of our podcast. So this is Two Pastors in a Pod. We're really pleased that you joined us. We love to hear from you. Now, we've had a couple of emails. Suggest stuff, tell us how we're doing, whether it's been helpful, whether you've got other questions. We can always seek to reply to those. So we can find this podcast on every other episode. Where can you find them, Rob?
Yeah, it's on the screen when Nathan puts it at the bottom, you'll find it there. And anyway, it's not just 2 pastors in the pod, it's 2 pensioners in the pod.
Oh, 2 pastors, 2 pensioners. This has been Two Pastors in a Pod. You can find us on Spotify, and you can find us on all the other places wherever you find your podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.